All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from the Illinois State Water Survey, and the webinar today is entitled, Is My Water Safe to Drink? Common Questions About Private Wells. The private well class is, as it says below here, is sponsored, funded, and supported by the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, RCAP, and US EPA. And we're partners with RCAP on our private well program, and I'll explain more about their role and what they do in just a few minutes. So the webinar today is part of our program with RCAP, as I just mentioned. The materials do follow our well owner course, and I do want to mention a lot of people who attend our webinars that think that is the private well class. It's actually not. These webinars are meant to support the class lessons. If you go to privatewellclass.org, and I'll show that towards the end, you can sign up for the 10-lesson class with your email, and it will send you a lesson once a week for 10 weeks. It's got a lot more detail than we could cover today. A lot of good examples and images that show concepts related to groundwater and all those things that are really important for you to know as a well owner. So we took the questions we received from everyone in advance, and we went through those. We've included a number of them at the end, as well as if you have any questions from the material today or that come up as you're watching today, you can add those into the question box or the chat box. Katie Buckley's monitoring that, and we will go over those at the end. And so that's where we're at. So as far as CEs, for those of you that are EHPs, we're accredited through NEHA and through the Illinois LEHP program to provide credit for environmental health professionals. So if this is for NEHA credit, you can only take the same course once every 2 years, which this course we offer, you can see below. The last time was in August, then in February last year. And so if you've taken any of those four, that's still within the 2-year window, depending on when your credentialing cycle starts. So if your credentialing cycle ended 12/31/21, meaning it started 1/1/22, and if you take this class today, you wouldn't be able to take it again until 1/1/24. So there's handouts in your GoToWebinar window. There's a handouts tab with the certificate of completion, the worksheet, and the agenda for today. We can also provide the certificate of attendance if you request that, a copy of the slide deck as a PDF, and then completed NEHA forms. Just email us at the email address that's listed there. So we did receive a lot of questions today. I think there were nearly 400 people, I think, signed up for the webinar today. So I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the State Water Survey. I'll be speaking today. Katie Buckley, who's with me, is our resources outreach specialist. She's also here at the Water Survey, and she's going to field your questions, and she'll work with you on CEs and other things related to after the fact today on our webinar. I mentioned RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. This is a group, whether you're a well owner or a professional, you should know who they are and get to know the folks in your area. They're made up of 6 regional nonprofits, each with a different name, like the Midwest Assistance Program, covers from Missouri to Montana. I'm in Illinois, so we're part of the Great Lakes Community Action Partnership. That's our region, if you will. We're not actually affiliated directly with them. We're at the University of Illinois, but you get the point. So if you're in one of the Great Lakes Community Action Partnership states, we can get you in touch with the private well person who's in the lead, and they have folks in every state. A lot of the work that RCAP does is related to small rural water and wastewater systems, also economic development, and so a lot of their staff are water or wastewater operators and have operator licenses, and so that really gives them a leg up and understanding issues related to groundwater and wells in most cases. So if you want to get in touch with one of those folks, you can look them up, or you can contact us at our email address, and I will get you in touch with the correct person depending on what state you're in. And then I know one of the things they offer and is this private well or spring assessment. It's really like a vulnerability assessment of your well. It's a one-on-one. They'll come to your house, ask you a lot of questions related to your well, take a look around, take some pictures, look at the well cap, and then give you this back as a completed document, so that you have an understanding of what kind of vulnerability you might have, or if there's things that maybe could be done better, or if everything's great, just reminders. There's a recommendation section at the end, reminders to test annually, and things you should know about your well. They'll look up your well log if there's one available. They'll add that to it, as well as any other relevant information. It's a pretty useful service. And again, this is all funded through US EPA that allows them to offer this for free. There's only so many they can do each year, but they've done a lot. We've helped them set up, and we helped develop this document, and they're actually implementing it, and they've done over 3,000 of these assessments around the country. It's like a sanitary survey for those of you that are EHPs that work with your community water supplies, but it's for private wells, and it's obviously voluntary, and there's no regulation behind it. It's just something to help well owners understand their wells. It's also an opportunity for you to meet well owners in your area and educate them about well owner issues, and promote best practices. And mostly it encourages communication. There's a lot of well owners who believe that their county or local health department has authority to condemn their well or tell them they can't drink their water. And although that may be true in a very few local jurisdictions in out east, in most of the country, that's not the case. And so you should really, as a well owner, you should reach out to your health department. They're there to help you. They can help you interpret your sampling results. They can tell you about best practices, even may have information about if you have any wells that need abandoned and things like that. So the assessment program, I should have updated this slide because it's over 3,000 now, but they've done them all over the country. Sometimes it's in support of actually the health agency. I know in Rhode Island, it's a very small state with a very small health department, and they don't have the wherewithal to go out and investigate every private well issue. And so the RCAP regional affiliate up there, RCAP Solutions, has agreed to help them. And so when Rhode Island Health Department gets a call and it really requires someone to go out and take a look, RCAP Solutions has a staff person who's been going out and helping free of charge to help the well owner alleviate that situation they may have. We've also held a bunch of workshops to train EHPs and other professionals on how to use the tool, the assessment tool, and it helps us because it also means that a lot of local jurisdictions are developing relationships with both us and the RCAP regional affiliates. And so that helps in supporting local efforts all over the country by providing speakers for workshops or helping organize workshops to bring well owners in to help educate and provide outreach. So I'm at the Illinois State Water Survey, which unless you're in Illinois and have had a reason to deal with the water survey as a well owner, most people don't know who we are, but we've been around for 126 years. I guess now it's 127, and now we're in 2022. But we were formed, we're a sister agency to our state geological survey, and most folks know who their state geological survey is. Every state has one. Illinois is really the only state that has a longstanding water survey. We have groundwater, surface water, and atmospheric science sections, chemistry group. Our job is to, one, we house the state's well logs. So when a well's drilled in Illinois, it goes through the county health department, and then a copy ends up here. And we house almost 500,000 well logs in the state. We have a public service lab that provides sampling to Illinois well owners, and we do a lot of outreach, education, and applied research, trying to understand water quality and quantity issues, both in the state and around the country. And it's what's led us to this program. It's a really great place to work. And again, as I said, we're 127 years old. We started going through our archives and finding a lot of really interesting information. This is from the early 30s, a chemist working in a water survey lab. This is us collecting water samples at parks around the state. This isn't dated, but you can tell from the vehicles that we're talking probably the 20s. And you can see the water survey, Urbana, Illinois box there that has the sample stuff. But these hand pumps were everywhere. And you can see the small tin cup on the ground that's just sitting there. It's supposed to be for anyone who comes up and wants to get a drink. So you can understand how unsanitary that actually would be over time. Everybody drinking from the same cup. These days, that's kind of, not the world we live in. And this is a well drilling rig from 1922. This is actually a community water supply well being put in for Weldon, which is a small town in Illinois. But it really shows how, there's an old steam engine off the picture it's providing all the power for all of this. But things have advanced quite a bit, and some of the things we take for granted, like having a well driller come out and put in a new well, was much more of a production when all this technology and effort was new. I grew up on an old hand dug well that was hand dug by my grandpa in 1933 on the small farm I grew up on, and it was done by hand. Period. It was only 14 foot deep, but it provided water, so that was good enough. So as a private well owner, there's things you need to understand. One, they're not regulated over most of the country once they've been installed. So most states have, except two, have regulations for well construction. And so when wells are put in, they have to meet well code. But once they're installed, there's only a few states that have any rules related to ever testing again, and those are usually related to sale of a property. There are a few local health districts in states like Massachusetts and counties in New York that have set up their own rules that require testing at property sale or remediation if a well has contaminants, but they're very local. If you live there, you probably know about those. Over most of the country, they're just not regulated. And so you can't also, and the other thing to note is you can't go by taste, odor, or color. It can be the best tasting. My dad swore our water was the best tasting water and better than city water because it didn't have chemicals in it. Cities put chemicals in their water and that makes it worse. Well, our water was always contaminated and our bodies got used to it. It wasn't protected. We had bacteria in it all the time. We just didn't know it. And so well water can be the best tasting and safest looking in the world, but unless you've tested it, you don't know. Arsenic is a great example. You can't see, taste, or smell arsenic in water. And so, and obviously that's a carcinogen, and at very high levels can even be an acute problem. So I live in town now, so I pay $40 to $50 a month. And now that my daughter's getting older, it's more like $70 a month for our community water supply. And that's the cost spread out over all of our residents for sampling regularly, maintaining all the infrastructure, and making sure that when I turn on my tap, there's water pressure and I have water that's clean and safe. As a well owner, that's your responsibility. The way I try to explain it to people is you're the water operator for a very small water supply. You just don't have a license like a community water supply operator does. So you need to take it seriously and be responsible and know your specific situation about your well and your geology and all those things. And that's what it's really about. It's about being aware. Understand the depth, how deep your well is, where your pump's set at. Do you have a well screen or not? What kind of well do you have? Is it dug, bored, or drilled? Is it in bedrock or sand and gravel? Or is it water table, if it's an old hand dug well? Knowing if there are naturally occurring contaminants in your area is something you can find out. There's been enough testing done around the country that most resource agencies in your state will have an idea. We know in Illinois, for instance, which aquifers have arsenic that we see in groundwater and which don't. There's other constituents that come up in certain parts and only particular aquifers because of the rock that's associated or the geology that's associated with those aquifers. And going through our class and these webinars also helps you learn enough about your well that you're asking better questions. You've hopefully identified local sources of information, and that's really what we want you to get out of this, is understanding who you can call locally and get good information and someone that can become a trusted source of information for you. And then lastly, there's no substitute for sampling your well. We get so many questions about things or hear about people who have done this or that, and I always ask, what did your water sample say? Well, we never tested our water. Well, you don't really know anything unless you've tested your water, because there's It could be that your water is just fine, but unless you test, you really don't know for sure. And so, yeah, today's the common questions webinar. So really the questions we get the most are about testing. You know, where do I collect a sample? What do I test for? How often? Where should I get it analyzed? You know, all of these things are just regularly in our inbox and in our webinar questions. And it's a common issue. And it's interesting because we know from working with other experts around the country that nearly 2/3 of wells in the United States, the current owner has never tested their well. And so they don't really know what their water quality is. So as far as where do you collect a sample, you know, you're trying to collect a drinking water sample, but the water at your kitchen tap could be very different from the water that's coming out of an outside tap that's before the piping in your home and before your softener, filter, RO, any other kind of treatment. So the water at your outside tap is more like the actual groundwater source and the water in the ground, whereas assuming it doesn't run through any of that treatment. And then the water at your kitchen sink is your finished water, if you will, if you have treatment or if you have a softener or you have lead or copper pipes. That water sitting overnight could make changes to the chemistry. And so what we do with our lab is we ask well owners to collect at least 2 sets of samples. One that's from an outside tap that's more like groundwater, and one that's from the kitchen tap that's their actual drinking water. And that way you know your drinking water quality, but we also know, at least for the folks in Illinois, kind of what the basic groundwater chemistry is, and that really helps us understand what's going on in an area and where there might be issues, or why, for instance, why does one part of the Muhammad Aquifer in Illinois have a lot of arsenic and another part doesn't? And that's something that I've done research on. So, and if you have any installed treatment devices, you know, that obviously affects the chemistry of the water. So when you do collect a sample and you call a lab, they should be able to provide you detailed instructions, all the bottles, all those things, and so that you can make an informed decision about the type of sampling you're going to do. So again, we suggest they collect at both the inside tap and an outside spigot that's before any kind of treatment. So I've already mentioned all this. One's representative of groundwater, the other's representative of your drinking water. We actually ask folks to collect the kitchen tap sample first and then go out to the outside spigot and let it run for 15 or 20 minutes so that you know the pump's kicked on and it's fresh groundwater coming into the well. Then they can be really different, and I'm going to show you an example of that. So this is a well owner in Illinois in the Muhammad Aquifer, and this person had the wherewithal. This is a sample from 2015 they took 3 samples, then this was their choice. This is the raw water sample from an outside spigot. So you can see the sodium in the first row, the 5th one down, is 25.9. And a lot of those arrows, less than arrows, mean it's below our detection limit. So our detection limit for aluminum is 37 micrograms per liter. If you go over to the right side, turbidity is 29, colors 48. Those are pretty high. The pH is 8.02. And then down near the bottom, hardness is 351. So this is fairly hard water, and it's got a lot of iron in it. Did I talk about iron? Where is the iron? Oh, it's at the very first thing. 2.99 milligrams per meter is pretty high. So then after their filter and softener, you know, then all of a sudden you see a lot of changes. The iron is almost gone, but now the sodium went from 25.9 to 198. So that's an unintended consequence of a salt softener, right? Or normal salt softener. If you're using a regular softener salt instead of potassium salt, you're going to see a big increase in sodium. If you're on a low sodium diet, that could be an issue. Some of those types of things. But you can also see on the right side the turbidity and color have went way down. The filter really helps with that. And the hardness went down from 300 and something to 0.68. So it makes a huge difference. This person also has an RO unit under their kitchen sink. And so they collected a sample after that. And you can see, you know, an RO is a membrane that removes most things. And so a lot of these are below detection limit now. Boy, excuse me. You know, the one thing that didn't go down is boron, I think it goes up, and I'm not sure why. The reason I show this slide, though, is because of the pH. In the first two samples, the pH was over 8. But by taking all the different constituents out of the water that help buffer the water, now the pH is down to 6.23. And I bring this up because we've run into a few folks that have whole house RO units, which I would never recommend to someone except in an extreme circumstance. RO uses about 5 gallons of water for every 1 gallon that you can actually drink. It's really wasteful, and it's also really expensive to do that whole house. And there's usually no good reason that your shower and your washing machine need to have water that's been through an RO. And so this is an unintended consequence as well. The pH is dropped. If you have lead or copper pipes and you're running water that's of a lower pH and is more aggressive or corrosive, then you can start to see lead and copper problems. And in this case, this is under the kitchen sink, so we don't see that. But it's a good thing to point out if you're up on some of the issues related to lead and copper and corrosivity in pipes, and all the infrastructure bill and all the money that's being spent to get lead pipes out of our public water supplies. If your home's built before '84, for sure, you probably have some lead in your system, unless it's PVC. So what do you test for? It really is different. It depends on if you got a shallow well versus a deep well, what formation geologically it's coming from. There's probably other samples that people could look at for a given aquifer to know what the general water quality is going to be. If there's known contaminants or if there's a known source. Are you near a landfill or are you near an old gas station? I actually had someone call me yesterday and ask about drilling a well. They bought a property that had been a landfill. They were actually going to try to drill a well through the buried landfill to create their water supply. You can't do that legally in Illinois. There's a setback that's required based on our construction code. And so, it's a non-issue anyway, but it's just, why would you want to do that in the first place, right? So it really matters what your situation is. You can ask other folks for advice, like your county health department or local health department. They should know if there's any kind of issue. For instance, in Tazewell County, Illinois, if you call the Tazewell County Health Department and ask them if there are any constituents you should test for, the first one they're going to mention is probably arsenic, because we know the aquifer over there in some places has fairly high arsenic. You can also ask neighbors. You can call the state agency that has your well records, or even local drillers. They have an idea of what kind of contaminants you might want to consider testing for, as well as co-op extension. So yeah, and what we recommend is that you sample for coliform bacteria and nitrate annually. They indicate a pathway into your well. So coliform bacteria isn't the one that causes health problems, it's E. coli. And nitrate causes health problems for pregnant women and their babies, but it's not regulated as a health contaminant for adults. And the reason we test for those two things, and we tell people to test annually for those things, is because they're both very simple to test for, and because they're so ubiquitous or available in the surface environment. If you have elevated levels of nitrate or you have coliform bacteria in your well, it likely means there's a pathway into your well from the surface. And so it's really a test to look at the integrity of your well. I have so many people who contact me and said, well, we tested for coliform bacteria and it said my well was safe. No, it means your well's safe from surface contaminants. It doesn't mean your drinking water doesn't have anything else in it. And so that's not enough to just test for coliform and nitrate to know if you have any kind of contaminants. Other things like arsenic, arsenic in the aquifers that I study here in Illinois, we have, if arsenic is high in a well, it's going to be high in the well 10 years from now. I mean, it doesn't change that much. It's in the source aquifer, it's in the material, the grains of the sand and geology that make up the aquifer, and it's just there. It's not going to change dramatically, so you don't need to sample as often for a lot of those other constituents. So a couple examples of where you need to, why you need to ask. So this is Rhode Island. All the little dots that are all over are orchards that used to exist, or where they have a record of. where until the 60s or maybe even a little later, most of the pesticides they used were arsenic based. And so because of that and the prevalence of the orchards there, the ground and especially the soil in each of these areas is contaminated with arsenic. And in some of those areas, the arsenic is leached into the groundwater, and it's also a groundwater problem. And so the State Department of Health put out this map to say, if you live near an orchard or you do live near an orchard, you might want to sample for arsenic because it's there's places where it's elevated. And then the big splotch in the middle is beryllium. So I, as a groundwater scientist for 30 years, I didn't even realize beryllium was on the regulated contaminant list for community water supplies through the Safe Drinking Water Act. It is. It's got a health limit, and you just don't hear about it very often, certainly not in Illinois. But they have it in their groundwater in Rhode Island, and so they put this map out. If you're in this area, you need to test for beryllium, because if you're drinking water with high beryllium, it could cause health effects. And so this is my best example of why you need to ask, because you wouldn't hear most people ever say, well, test for beryllium. It's just not a thing that's normally on the list of common constituents. So yeah, there is also tools that some states have put out. Mass DEP has this nice tool available. If you type in your address, it'll tell you whether you're at risk, assuming you have a bedrock well, of high arsenic or uranium. And so it's just meant to be helpful. So they've mapped the state. They've taken a lot of water quality samples, so they know where those things exist. And so by typing your address, it'll say, yeah, you should probably test for arsenic or uranium or both. And so it's really a service to all the citizens and all the private well owners in Massachusetts that they made this available. And then Wisconsin has one of the more robust tools. In Wisconsin, it's the DNR in Wisconsin that regulates private wells and community water supplies, as it turns out. They've developed this online tool. And so, with the way GIS has exploded, now you can get online and you can zoom into areas and do all those things. Well, I clicked up at the upper right on arsenic by county. And this is an old picture, but the site's still up. I just looked a few weeks ago. And it shows you the arsenic level by county of every county that has a color in Wisconsin. So if I live in Illinois, if I'm going to move to near Green Bay, that's where the 3 red counties are. And that means the average sample they have in those 3 counties is over 21 parts per billion, which is micrograms per liter. The health standard for a community water supply is 10. So in a community water supply, they cannot provide water to the residents in that community if the arsenic value is over 10. And you can see here a lot of the state is below 5, but there certainly are areas where there's some higher arsenic. And if I'm moving there, doesn't mean you shouldn't buy a house there or any of those things. It just means you should test. And as far as home sales go, our advice is buyer beware. If you're going to buy a home, don't buy it if it's got a well unless you've tested it yourself, or they've got a documented sample. A few states have taken care of that, like New Jersey. You can't buy or sell a home until you've tested it by law, and it's they get 13,000 samples a year that way, and they know everything there is to know about their aquifers and groundwater quality because of it. So here's what we suggest. We suggest testing annually for coliform and nitrate, as I mentioned. Brian Swistock at Penn State, they suggest every 14 months, so that over time, over 5 or 6 years, now you've staggered that, so you're sampling at different times of the year, especially for shallow wells. The time of year can make a difference especially on nitrate and coliform. If it's, may not be there in the winter, but it might be there in the summer type of thing. And it's not a bad idea. We're sticking with what most health departments recommend, but it's something to think about. And then every 3 to 5 years, test for the components we've listed here, metals, iron, lead, manganese, arsenic, things like turbidity, total dissolved solids, TDS, alkalinity. They all tell you something about your groundwater and your well water. If it's corrosive, if it, if it does have some metals in it. I'll mention manganese here because it's not regulated currently, but there's a lot of evidence today, and some states have already decided to regulate it as a health-based contaminant, and so has Canada, that it causes neurological effects. And I think 5 years from now, it probably will be regulated as a health contaminant. And so understanding those things is important. And manganese especially is an issue because most groundwater is high in iron, and a lot of it is also high in manganese. So some of you ask questions about this rusty color in your sink. That's the iron. But if it's more black, that's usually mixed with manganese. And I showed a slide earlier that had a clean filter and a dirty filter, and the dirty filter was completely black. That sample was both iron and manganese in that filter. And so it's, especially with small children, you should get your well tested and make sure that your manganese levels aren't too high. So when to test, in addition to what we've already suggested, anytime something has happened, we're showing a picture here of a well in Colorado after a forest fire, and, it melted all the wires, it melted the cap. Obviously that well is going to need a lot of work done before it could even be considered for use again. But if you think about that, those melted wires, what happened when the fire was going, if you've ever seen plastic dripping that's on fire, it's probably down in the well. And so it may be that they need a new well even. But anytime there's an event like that, or anytime really the well's opened, it's probably a good idea to at least test for coliform and nitrate. Because if opening the well cap is a good way to get some bacteria in your well. As far as getting it analyzed, we recommend using state accredited labs. The US EPA has a program for accrediting labs around the country that are used for public water supply samples. It's part of the law that they have to test, and they have to use an accredited lab. Every state keeps a list of those, and we would recommend that you use an accredited lab. You're more assured that they're going to do sampling the right way. They've done testing to prove that they can get accurate results, all that sort of stuff. Some states have private well sampling programs. In Illinois, for instance, until 2008, you could get a sample analyzed for metals and inorganics at our lab for free. That's all changed since then, but until that time, it was a really great service for the well owners in Illinois. I know New Mexico has a program where if you have a septic system and you put that on their registry of all the septic systems in the state, in return, they will give you a free water sample through the state lab, which is a really great program because it's important to know where all the septic systems are anyway, just because of the potential contamination issues that are related to them. As far as the other things you should know about a lab, a good lab is going to give you good instructions, be able to explain things to you. If you have to store it or preserve it or send it back, how you're going to do that, they should be able to answer all the questions you have. And if they can't, you should find another lab. I tell labs when we do a webinar just for labs, and I tell them, this is what I tell well owners. If you can't answer their questions, I tell them to go somewhere else, because you should have someone on staff, if you're doing a lot of private well samples, that can explain those issues and understands private well issues. It's just good business. And so that's what we recommend to you. As far as interpreting results, I'm going to show you a website in a minute. But really the thing to do is to take it to your local health department and get a qualified answer, or even your doctor. It's important to understand sometimes there may not be chemistry issues related to a contaminant. For instance, manganese may be high and it doesn't show up as a red flag because it's not regulated, but your health department may understand that it actually is something to be concerned about. If you find something in your well and it seems really out of whack, if you will, you can consider resampling, at least for that constituent, to confirm. Sometimes labs do make mistakes. And if you do have bacteria, most of the time you're testing for coliform first, then you need to test for E. coli. And until you've done that, you should boil your water that you're using for drinking and cooking until you can, then chlorinate, disinfect your well. So as far as interpreting results, New Hampshire developed this tool called the Be Well Informed tool. This is their website. You can Google Be Well Informed guide and get to this page, but hang on, I'll tell you something about that in a little bit. Down at the bottom, there's a button for enter your well water test results. What's cool about this site is when I click on that button, up at the upper right gray box says anonymous. It asks you which New Hampshire town or city you're in. They have a lot of smaller towns that have private wells in town, no public water supply. And so it's important to understand when you have a bunch of wells together like that and a bunch of septic systems, it becomes important to understand if the aquifer's been contaminated or if there's something else going on. But you can also put anonymous, which is what I did, and I put arsenic at 15 micrograms per liter. It's the standard is 10. And so what's nice about this units tab that have the drop down here is that most older tools that are online like this require you to convert milligrams to milligrams per liter, standard units. And for some of us, that's really a challenge. I know we ask a question on our private well class when the first lesson comes to you, it also has a pre-test. And the idea is you take the pre-test, you go through all our lessons, and then you take a post-test and you do better, right? If you've actually learned something along the way. One of the questions is about converting units. We've had almost 11,000 people take our class now, and probably at least a third of those have done the pre-test. It's voluntary, and only 27% get that question right. So it's not a simple thing. So the improvement they've made here is, to me, a big one, because it doesn't matter what units your lab gives you your sample results in, you can just make sure you plug it in the same way. When you submit that, then it gives you a red X arsenic, 15 milligrams or micrograms per liter, which is 0.015 milligrams per liter, which the standard is 0.01. So it exceeds the drinking water standard. The other nice thing about this is it tells you the kind of treatment that'll work for removing arsenic. Point of use absorptive media or point of use RO, reverse osmosis. One of the big issues we have is well owners who have all this treatment in their home because someone came along and tested their water and said, oh my gosh, you have this problem. And it turns out that the salesman kind of oversold what they really needed. And so this gives you some information on what that is. So as far as treatment equipment goes, I think that's the next slide. Yeah, there are standards set up. There are certification bodies, NSF, the National Sanitation Foundation, UL, Underwriters Lab, and WQA, the Water Quality Association. They're all third-party certifiers. And so if a company that develops treatment equipment wants to have a certified treatment device, which means it's been tested and proven to actually remove the constituents it's supposed to, it has to meet a certain standard. So for absorptive media, for arsenic, it's NSF ANSI standard 53. And if it's point of use RO, it's NSF ANSI standard 58, which is the third gray box there. So when you look for a treatment device, if you're going to buy an RO unit, make sure that it has either the gold seal from WQA, the UL Underwriters Lab, like you see on a lot of light bulbs, or NSF, National Sanitation Foundation. You see these on everything. You see them on light fixtures, you name it. There's third-party certification to make sure equipment meets certain standards that have been set up by the industries, like the ANSI and NSF ANSI standards that are for drinking water. And so if it doesn't have that, then you're taking a risk that it might not work. There's a lot of treatment equipment out there. If you look at a list from a treatment vendor online, there'll be RO units that are $1,000 or $2,000, and there'll be some that are $150. I can almost guarantee you the $150 one has not been through any kind of certification process, and so you're taking a risk of whether or not it works or not. You should always try to use certified equipment. The Be Well Informed tool is so popular, or it was when it came out, that they gave the code to the US EPA, who set up a site to allow other states to develop a similar web page as the one we just went through. And the idea was every state has its own rules and maybe has other information that they're more interested in having the well owners in their state understand and know about. And so it gave each state an opportunity to develop, to customize the web page then to fit what they were interested in. The EPA asked ECOS, which is the Environmental Council of the States, I apologize, we have a fire truck going by, to take over and manage the site. So this is actually, you can see at the top, it's called, the website is bewellinformed.info, and you don't have to type the /workbench, that'll just pop up. But so far, the 7 states and 1 county that are listed below are on that select button. If you click on it, it's a drop down and it lists Arizona, Massachusetts, Michigan, all those 7 states plus Wake County, North Carolina, which is the Raleigh area. I have a lot of wherewithal in that county for private well issues. And you can then go to the state site, if you will, to enter your data, and it'll give you state-specific information with your results. So like the New Hampshire one we looked at, you know, they had documents that you could look at related to, say, arsenic in New Hampshire and what they know about it there and the issues there. It's different in Arizona or Virginia or wherever. And so we're going to work with these folks and hopefully increase the number of states that have this resource available. You can still use a New Hampshire one, even if you're not from New Hampshire, and that's what I usually recommend to people until I found out about this. But hopefully we can build this up and help them make this a more robust site and usable for more well owners around the country, because it's really a great tool. And again, after saying all that, they are just tools. And sometimes drinking water can have really unique water quality that's not typical. And so you should always take your sample results to a qualified person and get an answer from a health professional. They want to help and make sure your water's safe and it's safe for your family. Like I said, in almost every case, they cannot tell you to stop drinking your water or condemn your well. They may recommend it. You know, we had a well owner in Illinois that I sampled their well, and it came back with arsenic at 250 ppb, which is 25 times the limit, and they had 7 kids. And I'm not a regulator, I'm a scientist, and I explained the risks. And you know, it was one of those things where it's a family farm, it'd been there forever. The dad and the granddad had all drank that water their whole lives. And you know, it doesn't mean that every person that drinks it's going to get sick, but it certainly increases your odds. And so I suggested they talk to the health department, and the health department in that county, in all of Illinois, cannot tell them they can't drink their water. They can only say, well, this is why you really shouldn't drink it. So, and if you're concerned about that, if you're, you know, say you're in Massachusetts and you're concerned that your health district has some of those rules in place, just call them and say, hey, do you have, what well rules do you have for water quality? If someone has a sample done, what authority do you have to do whatever? And if they say they have that kind of authority, then you can make that decision for yourself. Yeah. Other things, so correcting poor construction. And honestly, poor well construction is probably one of the biggest issues we have. So when well construction code was first developed in most states, well, in most states it wasn't until the 80s. In a few states, like Illinois, it was in the 60s. But that code has changed over time as we've learned, right? So the well code we had in 1968 is different than the well code we have today. But with any change in the code or when codes were first established in every state, existing wells are grandfathered in. So the hand dug 14-foot well that I grew up on that's totally not safe is still in use today. It doesn't have to meet well construction code because it was already there before the code was developed. Wells in pits, so I think in the late 50s, early 60s, they developed a pitless adapter, which wells used to be in pits in cold climates, because if your well came all the way to the surface and the pipes came all the way up to the surface, in the winter your pipes would freeze. So people put their wells 4 or 5 feet below the ground in a pit so that it would never freeze in the winter. Well, the pitless adapter allows you to have your pipe come all the way up to the surface, but the line doesn't. It turns and goes out of the side of the casing at depth so that it won't freeze. So we still have wells though in pits today, which are really risky, not only from the standpoint of if it rains a lot or whatever, they can fill up with water, but they're also a safety risk. Somebody steps on an old piece of plywood and there you go. And there's also hand dug wells that are still in use, and there's a lot of them. And so they both provide an opportunity for contamination from the surface, and they can be a safety hazard. And here's just two examples. I'll do the one on the right first this time. That's a dead goat in an old well. Now, it turns out this well is not in use anymore when Don took this picture, but it had been. And instead of sealing it, they put a piece of, it's an old brick or stone well, they put a piece of tile, concrete tile, vertically in the well, and it only came up about a foot above land surface. So a goat managed to find its way and fell in, and that's what that looks like. We've seen dead rabbits, raccoons, rats, snakes, you name it, in wells. And some of those wells, people are still drinking the water. Even we had someone who had frogs in their well who said, I thought the water kind of tastes funny. I think something's going on. And then they find they have frogs in their well. So, yeah. And the picture on the left is from the Washington Department of Ecology, which in Washington State, they are the resource agency for well construction, well logs, and licensing drillers. And they had a blog. This is from probably 2013 or 2014, and which I was following at the time. And this is an old hand dug well in a little building, or it's an old, large diameter well. And that old tin tile is the casing. You can see the blue pump there, and they had a piece of plywood over the whole thing. And the person that lived there probably stepped on that plywood 100 times, but this time it broke and it killed her. But you can see that this well house isn't in great shape. They've got a little funnel there that's probably to put oil in. It looks like insulation that's coming apart and is all over the ground around on the floor that's fallen into the well. You can see there's an old piece of plywood under the lighter colored plywood. It's just, you can imagine what's fallen into that well over the years, and the folks still drink that water. It's just not a safe situation. There should be no way for anything to fall in your well. So what do? You should bring them up to code the best you can. If it's in a pit, have a contractor, a driller, install a pipe up to the surface and put in a pitless, if you need that, if you're in a cold climate. And then fill that whole thing in with clay, grout, so that it can't have water get into around the annulus of the well, and all those things. But talk to your well authority, county, or contractor. In Illinois, our Soil and Water Conservation District even offers, and this is for abandoning a well, not actually improving a well, cost share for some of that stuff, and I'm getting ahead of myself. So going to abandoned wells. We see many farmsteads that have an old hand dug well, and then later they've drilled a well, and they still kept the old one around for a while. They thought they'd use it for their livestock or their garden, but eventually they just put a piece of plywood over it or some kind of cap, and they forget about it. We see so many of those that are really a safety hazard and also a source of contamination. So if you have an old well like that, you should fill it in. It should be properly abandoned so that there's no chance that you're going to contaminate the aquifer or someone's going to fall in and get hurt or killed. If they do, you're very likely to be liable whether they had permission to be on your property or not. And if you cause a contamination problem, we've also seen people who are just honestly stupid and put old barrels or pesticide cans or whatever. It's a nice hole in the ground that they can just throw that stuff. Really bad idea, because you're introducing those materials. Eventually those things are going to rust, and if there's anything in them, it's going to get into the system, into the ground, and cause a problem. Here's some examples. Again, the bottom picture is from the Washington State Department of Ecology. In this case, a guy fell 45 feet in an old abandoned well that was in his backyard, and he didn't know about it. And he walked away. Very lucky. There's a horse in a well. Yeah, it's an old abandoned well that was out in the middle of nowhere. You can see the brush around it. And then all these newspaper clippings are from Illinois, well, except the third one. The third one is Jessica Mcclure, which if you're old enough, you remember in the late 90s, she fell down a well in Texas, and it took them over a day, I want to say, to dig her out, basically. And she sang, and they covered it on CNN, and it was basically live coverage for, many hours. And it captivated the nation at the time. She's grown now, has 3 kids of her own. Some of these folks, though, weren't so lucky. And these are all in Illinois. The other one's in Springfield, which is where our capital is, center of the state. Another is over in Western Illinois, and one is up in a Chicago suburb. And, back in these days, even in the late 90s, the internet wasn't like it is now. And so it's likely that the folks in Springfield didn't know about the girl in Buffalo Grove or vice versa, but it happens more than you realize. It's just these wells are an old abandoned well that's not sealed is really a risk, and that's the message. So a little bit about our class. So again, I mentioned it's 10 lessons, self-paced. So what happens is you sign up with your email address, and we send you a lesson as a PDF once a week for 10 weeks. You're on your own to read it. If you have questions, you can email us. And if you don't read it, that's on you. But the idea is it's information that'll, if you go through it, you'll learn a lot about some of the basics of being a well owner, your aquifer, groundwater, well type, why you should sample, best practices, all those things, treatment, what you need to look out for. And so it's meant to just be a resource for you as a well owner to help you learn some basics. You'd be surprised how many people have no idea about the geology where their well is or where their water's coming from, what kind of unit, whether it's a bedrock unit or sand and gravel, or if there's any local contaminants they need to be worried about. You need to be inquisitive to be a well owner and understand those things about your well, even how groundwater flows through the ground and gets into your well. So this is the front page. If you just go to privatewellclass.org, click on Take Our Free Class or Learn by Email, and it takes you, well, before I get there, there's a resource library that goes with each lesson. So when you go through the 6 to 10 pages that are the lesson, you can come back to our website and look at some of this additional information. If some of the concepts weren't clear or you wanted more information, one of the things we recommend is you look at these other resources. And so for the first lesson, it's called The Science of Groundwater. The second one is Groundwater and Well Contamination. And if you didn't, the lessons are written in a conversational style, like I'm talking to you. And for some people that resonates and some it doesn't. And so this is an opportunity to go back and look at some more detailed information on each of the concepts that are presented there. Just simple things like, we dealt with whether we should include porosity and permeability because everyone has to understand those concepts. And when you run it through one of those checkers that tells you what grade level it's at, some of those concepts make this a higher grade level than what you're supposed to or whatever. But it's really important that you understand what porosity and permeability are and how that affects what kind of water you might have and whether you have a low yield well versus a high yield well, and whether it's, whether you're getting your water from the water table or is it a buried aquifer that's artesian. All those things really matter as far as water quality and risks you have and all that stuff. We do webinars like the one we're doing today, which is also being recorded and will be on our website in a few days. But in November, we did this webinar on Well Care 101. It's another one we offer several times a year. You can go to our webinars and events page and see all the webinars we've ever done. And it's worthwhile. Explain in a minute about the questions. But the questions we're going to answer at the end today are the ones you all asked when you registered. We do that every webinar. So there's different questions every month. And so some of those are really worth going through, even if you want to go back. I think in August was the last time we offered this particular webinar that we're doing today, but the questions were different, or some of them were, and some are the same. And so you can learn a lot more about your well just by going through the questions. Every July we do one just on septic systems. We bring in a guy from Massachusetts who was a sanitarian for 8 years and inspected septic systems as our expert to answer all your questions. And we go through all the basics of, most well owners are also septic owners. That's not always true. And there's actually more septic systems out there than there are private wells. But it's important to understand things you should and shouldn't do. And then we do specialty, if you will, webinars, like one on lead. So we did this twice, once in 2016 and once in 2018. We brought in an expert from Virginia Tech to talk about the work she'd done looking at lead in homes with private wells. And it's really worth watching. And along with that, then for a topic like lead, we create a resource page. If you go to privatewellclass.org/lead, you'll get to this page, and it's got resources for you to look at, like at the bottom, water filters for lead reduction. The EPA did some research after Flint happened and found that there's certain filters that are really good at removing lead. I mean, they're required by the certification bodies to remove, like, I think it's 250 or maybe it's 500 ppb of lead, where there's no safe limit, and they were doing a great job of lowering it below 15 up to 1500 ppb of lead. So it's it's good information if you're interested or have a concern about that particular issue. We have some short videos, training videos, things like, what do I need to know about a shared well? I'm surprised. It's one thing I didn't realize when we started this program 8 years ago, is how many people share wells. It can really be an issue when your pump fails, if you have no agreement in place, or it turns neighbors into enemies because of money, all kinds of things. So there's a short video, 4 to 6 minutes long, about the things you should know and do. And I'm surprised at how many calls I get from folks who have a shared well and are concerned because they're having an issue. So why does my well keep losing pressure? One of our really popular videos, most people have, well, a lot of private well owners have pressure issues. Either it's not designed big enough a system, or they don't have their pressure set high enough. We have a video called How Does My Pressure Tank Work? And it's had well over 400,000 views since 2016. It's just, it seems to be an issue for a lot of people. And we started a podcast, if you're into those things. We bring on an expert. The first season was 12 episodes. It started around the 1st of September, and it goes through mid-November. And you can look at that at Tap Talk. It's just drinkingwaterpodcast.org. And it covers both private well issues and some small rural community water supply issues. But it's a conversation with an expert. Judy Manners is with the Tennessee Department of Health. She is an expert on springs, which springs are a huge issue. So many people swear by their spring water, and in almost every case, springs are contaminated with bacteria to a point that sometimes it's really dangerous. And it's amazing how people swear by that's the best tasting water, and not concerned about the water quality issues that go on with that. If you are in an area where there's a lot of native Spanish speaking folks, we do have a Spanish version of our class. There's a URL below. It includes all the lessons and some of the videos. It's not as robust as our English language site, but it provides certainly an opportunity for folks who would rather take a class in Spanish to do so. So the goal of all of that, and the reason we have our program, are these 3 things. As a well owner, you should know why your well is important, and why it's important, why you need to understand how it works, and the things you can do to help protect you and your family from risks from water quality issues. And that's the message we try to get across, and that's what we work with every day. We get calls and emails almost daily from well owners asking for help with certain things. And in some cases, it's an easy fix or an easy answer. In some cases, we have to find them someone locally. But it's, the more you learn about your well, the better positioned you're going to be when you need to make a decision when something goes wrong. Too many people wait till something goes wrong to start looking into issues related to their well. And since you're on this webinar, you're not the folks I'm talking about in all likelihood. But there's so many people who don't, they just want an answer. They don't want to learn. And we encourage everyone to go through our class rather than just expect us to give them support whenever they have an issue. So I mentioned submitted questions. We did get a lot of questions. Like I said, there's over 400 people who registered today. And so we're going to go through a number of those. Many overlap, and some we answer almost every month. And so I do want to remind you that Katie's taking questions today as well through the chat or question box. So if you have a question, you can type it in there. She's keeping track, and I'll pull that up. We share a Google Doc. It's pretty slick. And once we're done with these questions that we're going to go through now that were asked in advance, we will pull those questions up. And I'll just tell you now, if I can't answer it, I'll tell you I can't answer it, and I'll try to find an answer and ask you to email us so that I know who to contact with the answer. That's certainly going to happen. You know, there's a lot of issues related to private wells. I'm a hydrologist, you know, not a driller. I'm not a lab technician. So yeah, we'll see what we get. I do want to mention that our past webinars have questions also, like the ones we're about to go through. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different, but I do want the one I showed a while ago, the November 21 webinar, Well Care 101, has questions related to sulfur smell, well types, and treatment that were asked this month as well. And I didn't include those here, so you can go to that recording and take a look at those if you're curious. Are at-home water test kits good enough for homeowners, specifically bacteria coliform tests? So the short answer is no. But what I want to mention is there are a few things like, you know, some industries are pretty sophisticated, like for swimming pools. So the pH tests that they have for those are really accurate. And our retired now lab head of our lab had a pool. He knows those things work well. He also has fish tanks, and he needs some of that information. But I haven't even heard of a coliform at-home test before. But the many others that we've ran across that you can get in a store, they're just not accurate. You know, some of them are colorimetric. Some of them, a number of them give false positives or false negatives, and because they're too sensitive or for whatever reason, and some do really just make outrageous claims. And so we really haven't seen any that can give you accurate quantitative results that you need to understand what kind of water quality issues you might have. Yeah, and I don't know how else to answer that other than I would not recommend using at-home tests for protecting your health. I would get it done by a lab. That's where I'm at. There are a number of common well issue questions that we get asked. And so like, what maintenance do I need to do with a well? I don't know anything about wells, or I'd like to know more about sandpoint drilled or natural spring wells. Well, that's what our class is for. You know, we do a whole class, a whole webinar just on well types. We're not going to do that today. And so, you know, being on the webinar today is a great start, but you really should sign up for the class. It's a lot more information, and it'll give you a chance to go through things in an order that will help you understand first about the geology and hydrology related to your well, how water gets in your well, all the way through then treatment at the end. And you know, we address common issues. We have one just on best practices. There's even an issue, lesson 7 is really about how to find local information, because, you know, my job is not to help every single person in every part of the country understand their specific geology and groundwater issues. It's to help you understand how to find that information and give you those tools. And so, yeah, again, it's a self-paced class. It's free. You just need to read it. That's the only catch, and that's really the truth. It'll come to you every week. And once you sign up, we ask you to take the pre-test, the post-test, and do the evaluation at the end. Some do, some don't, which is fine, but it's worthwhile information, and you should go through it if you're a well owner. Yeah, we already went through this, I guess, but this really, that's all you need to do is click on those buttons, and it asks you to put in your name, your first name, your email address, and what state you're from. And we ask what state you're from because this is a national program funded through US EPA, and they want to know that we're reaching people all over the country. And not only do we reach people all over the country, but we also have a lot of people who've signed up from other countries. And so it does get a lot of traffic. Our private well has a metal cover that is flush with the driveway. It is the original cover from 1965, and I paraphrase this a little bit. Will we be required to upgrade this if we sell our home? So I've already talked about this a little bit. Wells that were installed before there was code or before there were updates, they're grandfathered in, and so they don't have to meet current code. You might want to check. A few states, counties, or local health districts do require testing at property sale, and like Rhode Island is one of those states. They have probably the most stringent law as far as the state law. Like in New Jersey, you have to have a sample done by the state lab. They give the results to the buyer and the seller, and the buyer and the seller have to decide who's going to pay for it. But it's really up to them. They don't share it with anybody else. You can't I can't go to look up my neighbor's water quality result that he just did when he sold his home or when he bought his home from next door to me. That's private. It's considered private information. But in Rhode Island, they went one step further and they tied it to their building inspector, who has the authority, if you have a contaminant problem, to condemn the property if it doesn't, because they say it's unlivable. If you have a well that has a contaminant that causes health effects, they can say that's unlivable and require you to add treatment. And the reason I bring that up related to this original question about the cover is because if you're in an area where you do need to test, or more and more lenders are requiring a water sample be tested prior to approving a loan. So if I'm the buyer, I may have, Fannie Mae or FHA or somebody say, well, you have to have a sample that shows the water's safe. If it turns out it's not, and it's because the well's not sealed properly at the top because it's just got a cover on it, it might be necessary to fix that to approve it for the sale. So that was my roundabout way of getting there. But I would just ask your state, county, or local health department of what rules they might have related to sale of a home, because they'll know. There's only 3 states that require it statewide right now, or 4, I think. Oregon, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. But there are a number of counties. I know there's a couple counties in New York that have a testing rule whenever a property's sold. And then there's a few local health districts in areas. I don't know for sure that they're just in Massachusetts. I know there's at least one in Massachusetts, maybe one in Connecticut. But they have the authority in those states to set their own rules locally, and so some of them have. Should I disinfect? Well, does well water have to be disinfected? Well, no, it doesn't. And in fact, most wells are not disinfected regularly. I mean, if you have a properly constructed well and everything is sealed properly, groundwater can be perfectly fine. In fact, in some states, until probably 15 years ago, communities weren't even, especially small public water supplies like a subdivision, weren't required to have chlorination in their distribution system. And now it's all changed, but it just goes to show that some groundwater systems, you don't need to chlorinate or have disinfection necessarily. The groundwater may be okay. So it's really only needed when there is bacterial contamination, which when your well isn't sealed properly, or it's not properly constructed, or if it's getting water from a shallow source, then you might have more of a risk. And again, you test first to understand that. And so here's some examples really. If it's a shallow well, an old dug well, where it's getting water from the water table, maybe from a thin sand layer. So you might have, for instance, the 14-foot hand dug well I grew up on, it's really possible that it's all clay, except that there's 3 inches of sand in one spot, maybe at 12 feet or something like that. That's where all the water's coming in the well. And it's brick line that's not cemented, so water can come in between any of the bricks. And so if there's a big rainstorm, like our well, if there was a big rainstorm, our water was cloudy coming in out of our tap, because the water in the well was cloudy because surface water was getting into our well. And so it's not safe, and it always had bacteria in it. We just got used to it. The other type of well, sand points, they're shallow, they don't have any grout. Most of the time they're getting water from less than 20 feet below land surface, and the surface soil is sandy, which means there's a lot of infiltration. And so very likely that those get contaminated with bacteria as well. Or if there's a source nearby, there's a septic system that's too close, or because of the geology, some of the water from the septic field is actually being pulled into the well, or if there's a feedlot, cattle or some kind of livestock, or you're near a pond. I had a guy in New York contact me and say, I had the stuff in my well, so I sent it to a lab and they said it's algae. Is that possible? And so I said, well, algae needs light, so it's not, unless your well's wide open somehow, whatever. And I said, so where is it? So he sent me a picture, and it was about 5 feet from a lake. And so he had direct lake water coming into his well, and that was the source of the algae. And so, that's just common sense, though. You need to understand those things and realize that what kind of problems they can cause. So as far as vulnerable geology, permeable soils, so they're more sandy at the surface. We have an area that's along one of the Illinois River, the major river in our state, where there's a lot of sand points and a lot of shallow drilled sand and gravel wells. But we see, you can measure with depth and see concentrations of things like arsenic or of nitrate that are higher near the water surface, below ground, and not as high if you go deeper into the aquifer. It's from surface contamination, because when it rains hard, all that infiltrates and it pulls stuff down with it. Or karst geology, sinkholes, caves. It's really, there's a lot of large fissures and cracks. And so we have a county that's almost all karst. 80% of the private well samples there come back positive for coliform or E. coli. And it's just, there's no way to keep that from being contaminated. There's livestock in the area. The water seeps through sinkholes straight into the aquifer. There's no soil to even act as a filter. It's all rock. And so, yeah. And the other thing would be cracked casing or no sanitary cap. Like I said, we've seen a lot of things in wells: bugs, rats, frogs, and a cracked casing. It's a tree root example here. We had someone, and I know that was a question. I'm not sure I answered it because I was going to talk about it here. But they contacted me and said, our well keeps testing positive for bacteria, but we have nothing around it. It's got a proper cap, blah, 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 blah. So I said, send me a picture. There's a probably 18-inch diameter tree within about 4 feet of the well. And it was a PVC constructed well. And so the casing was PVC. And so I said, you should open up the well and take a look, because what's likely happened is roots have got around the well casing, and as they've grown, they've squeezed and cracked the casing. It was a pretty big tree, and sure enough, that's what the problem was. And so, you can't have anything near your well. And tree roots are, they're bad for not only septic and septic fields, but also for wells, especially PVC that, near the surface in the winter, they're more susceptible to cracking and that sort of thing. I have coliform in my well. What can I do? Well, what we just talked about, understanding your well construction, geology, and water source is the first thing to understand about where it might be coming from, because you want to understand, is it a one-time thing? Something happened and somehow my well got contaminated, or is it a continual thing and I'm going to have to think about permanent disinfection? So the first thing to do then is to disinfect your well using shock chlorination, which I'm going to talk about that in a second. But you want to disinfect your well and your water system, all your pipes, everything else, with chlorine, and kill any bacteria that might be in the line or in the well, and then retest to be sure it's gone. And in the meantime, you boil your water. If it comes out okay, then you go back to testing annually. If not, then it might be worth trying it again. But there's some things to note about that. One, chlorine is ineffective of a pH of 8, which becomes a problem if the water has a pH that's high, and that does happen in some areas. And if you have a local source, you're close to a feedlot or a septic system where it's karst, it's probably going to come back. The other thing, so then what are your options? Really, it's continuous disinfection. And that's you're basically accepting that my well is going to have bacteria in it, but I'm not going to let the water I drink in my house have bacteria in it. So I'm going to add a chlorine feed or put in a UV system, ultraviolet light that kills, virus, bacteria, and all those things. Or you could use hydrogen peroxide, just like you would chlorine. It's a treatment device. It's got a feed and a pump, and it adds into your line, and it'll disinfect your water as it comes into the house, rather than trying to not disinfect all the time. And so that's the difference. Shock chlorination is, yeah. If that doesn't work, or maybe it is something's wrong with your well, it's cracked at the surface, or you had, something living in your well head, on your wellhead, because your vent tube didn't have a screen on it, or snakes got in it somehow or whatever. The other option is then to repair that and bring it up to code and make sure it's properly sealed, and that may solve your problem once you disinfect, shock chlorinate the well. And then the last is you may have to just drill a different well. That would be the other option, which isn't a good option. I would add continuous disinfection first, but that's your options if that were to happen. As far as shock chlorination goes, it's a one-time disinfection of your well. The idea is you treat everything with chlorine, not just the well itself, but all the pipes on the inside. You run chlorinated water through them, every pipe in your home, through every spigot, shower, toilet, sink, and you let it sit overnight so it kills all the bacteria that might be in the line somewhere. And that's the ideal situation. It kills everything. The next day, you pump all those until you don't smell chlorine anymore, and then it's all gone. So you have no lasting effects from the chlorine. You're not drinking water that's chlorinated. You pump that to waste, and you're back to square one, where you are, back to a regular system that doesn't have bacteria in it. And if it comes back, that's when your problem starts in the previous slide. So as far as how to disinfect your well or shock chlorinate your well, we looked at, there's guides that are half a page long, there's guides that are 25 pages long, and Minnesota Department of Health has one which we link to on our website. As I mentioned earlier, we have a set of resources for each lesson. Well, under lesson 10, which is about water treatment solutions, we link to this document, Well and Water System Disinfection for Private Wells. It's really great. It walks you through things. It's got diagrams and pictures, tells you how to mix the chlorine so it's not too concentrated. It is an oxidant, especially for a bedrock well. If you pour straight 5% chlorine down your well, you could leach metals from either your brass fittings on your pump, or if there's metals in the rock, if it's a bedrock well. There's studies that show that putting straight bleach down like that can really cause a problem. And so you mix it so it's the right concentration. They even tell you what to do about bypassing some of your treatment equipment. It's just a really handy document. So that's what we recommend using and following their guidelines. And so there's a couple other things related to all this, the next two questions. The first one here is, I have traces of E. coli in my water, and I'm assuming that means in your finished water, because if it's in the beginning, before your treatment, you shouldn't have it at the end. My treatment process is as follows: a 20 micron whole house filter, a 5 micron carbon filter, water softener, UV, and RO. So that goes to his fridge dispenser, water dispenser, and asking if that's sufficient, or should they entertain a chlorine injection as well. So I don't know how you could have bacteria. Really, the UV is for the bacteria, right? It kills viruses and bacteria. So if you still have E. coli in the water coming out of your fridge, then your UV isn't working properly. One thing about UV is it's using light. So where we usually see problems with a UV system is where it's not been, where the water's not been filtered before it gets to it. And so it's got some turbidity to it. So there's particles in the water, and that shields the UV from killing all of the bacteria. So you need to make sure that you, and it looks like you've got a 20 micron and a 5 micron in front of your UV, so I don't think that's the issue. So what I'm assuming here is that your traces of E. coli are in your well before treatment. So, but UV is a disinfection method, and that's the one you're already using that. You should not also need chlorine. In fact, if you go to chlorine for some reason, you don't need both. And that's, so I have a couple questions for you. This is class A, top of the line type of water system. I mean, I'm guessing that the water actually, water needs some minerals in it to have some kind of taste. Some people really like, mineral water, if you will, or whatever. This water probably has nothing in it. It's really been, it's just H2O. So do you have all this treatment because you identified a problem? If you haven't sampled and you added all this, that's one of the things that we see happen more often than not. It's not necessary. And if unless you have tested your well and you have contamination that requires all of those kinds of treatment, you don't need to have all those kinds of treatment, period. And the other responsibility you have and you've created here is, I had a guy from who's retired from the Minnesota Department of Health review my class before we ever put it online 8 or 10 years ago. In the lesson 10, it's about water treatment solutions. He said we shouldn't even use a lesson 10. We shouldn't tell people about treatment and to use treatment, because in his experience, and he had over 30 years of experience working with well owners, he saw more cases where the treatment device was the source of contamination, usually bacteria, because it wasn't maintained properly, cartridges weren't changed out, all those sorts of things. Or there was breakthrough because it hadn't been whatever it was supposed to take out, like arsenic. It was way past the point where it needed to have to be backflushed or whatever. And so your biggest responsibility is to ensure that all of that equipment is being maintained properly and you're following all the procedures for cleaning each of those devices and replacing things when they need it. Because if you don't, this could be the source of contamination for your well. And a lot of folks wouldn't be able to afford to put all of this treatment in, just to be honest. And so we always recommend that you test and figure out what your problems might be, because there's a lot of folks out there who, you go to Walmart today, they sell bottled water, and there's a sign that's got this old rusty large water main with a valve on it that looks really nasty, and the paint's chipping off and it's got rust on it, and it says your tap water's been hanging out in some pretty seedy places. They're trying to scare you into thinking that your drinking water from a community water supply isn't safe. It's totally not true. It's marketing to get you to buy their bottled water. And so many people do that, and it's a waste. And it's, instead of paying 25 cents for 1,000 gallons, you're paying $5,000 for 1,000 gallons if you're buying bottled water. Anyway, my point here is your water should be completely clear of any kind of contaminant, but I'm not sure it's really necessary to have that if you didn't test first, and that's what we always recommend. So I got this question, anything related to, it's not really a question, anything related to disinfecting with hydrogen peroxide. So, there's advantages to hydrogen peroxide. The big advantage is that, it breaks down to water and oxygen, where chlorine, especially some types of public water systems that are using chlorine disinfection, it can cause THM problems, which is a carcinogen, which is a byproduct of the process that's caused by chlorine. And so some people don't want, and there's a lot of private well owners who just don't like the taste of chlorine. Like city water has that chlorine taste. I don't like it. I hear that all the time. But for shock chlorination, the only time I would even consider it is if you know that you don't have a choice, like chlorine's not going to work because the pH is too high. It's really expensive. It's, they talk about, well, you can use it at home. You can go buy, I think it's restaurant grade hydrogen peroxide, 35%. It'll burn your skin. It'll damage your eyes. You have to wear eye gear and gloves, and it also reacts really fast. And so it's dangerous. And so I would never recommend it for the normal person to try to use. I'd have a professional do it if you want to have that done. So for the shock side of it, to just try to clean out your well and kill all the bacteria in your line, like you do if you had a bacteria hit, I would not use hydrogen peroxide unless you don't have any other choice. But for continuous disinfection, where you're going to add a treatment device that's in the line and it's pumping, like a chlorine pump, it's as much of an option as UV or chlorination. It's about the same costs for the equipment, for a chlorine feed as it would be for a hydrogen peroxide feed. You're going to spend more for the actual hydrogen peroxide. It's $50 a gallon or so versus chlorine, which 5% chlorine's much less. So over time, it's going to have a lot higher maintenance cost. But again, the advantage is you don't have, whenever you're continuously feeding chlorine, that means it's killing bacteria, and some of it's going to get eaten up in the line, but you're probably going to have some chlorine residual in the water you drink. And whether you taste that or not, or how sensitive you are, it doesn't mean that it has anything in it that's harmful. You need to test, but you could have that chlorine taste. And so if you don't want to have any of that left over, that's an advantage. Most of the time you don't taste it, or you get used to it. There's a lot of people on, I'll call city water, that have no idea that they're drinking water that might have a little chlorine in it. So it's a safety thing. So it doesn't have that taste of the byproducts, and it works over a larger range. And so, it's really, that's what I know about it. I've not ever seen a system with hydrogen peroxide myself, but that doesn't mean anything. I know there's places where they're used a lot, or it's really handy. I know when they used to use the tablets in wells, that's a really ineffective method. And so some folks went to using hydrogen peroxide then, but you can use liquid chlorine feed the same way. So hopefully that answers your question or gives you at least some information. It's certainly it's that the fact that it breaks down into water and oxygen is an advantage, because you're not really adding anything into your water stream, any kind of chemical. Is there anything I can do to combat high iron levels? Well, I want to say that iron isn't considered a health risk, but obviously it does cause staining and all those other problems. And when it oxidizes, not only the staining, but it also can build up sediment, like in your pressure tank or wherever. But you can start if, iron is in solution. So and when it hits air, it gets oxygen, it converts to iron oxide, which is the rust and sediment that you see, and the colored staining. So if you, most of the time what you have to do is you have to oxidize the water first. Sometimes softeners will do that, and they remove enough iron that it's not a problem. But if for some reason you don't want soft water, you don't have a softener, they do make iron specific filters that basically oxidize the dissolved iron and then run it through the filter so that it can be captured, because it forms particles. And also note that both chlorine and hydrogen peroxide are oxidants. So when you put them in a line, if you have iron and manganese even as well, then it's going to oxidize those, and you're likely going to need a filter at some point, where you're going to have issues there too. What I'd recommend is, for more information, is Google iron drinking water. Illinois Department of Public Health has a link that should show up pretty near the top of that search, and there's more information there. I mean, it's just a common problem. The Illinois groundwater is high in iron and manganese, and it's just part of what you have to deal with. But it isn't, at least it's not a health issue. Someone asked two questions, and the second one was, how safe is our public water? And I answered the other one either already, or I will get to it. I just want to mention that community water supplies are safe, period. You see issues like Flint that happen, that was in 2013 or 2014, so it was 8 years ago now, 8 or 9 years ago, and it's caused a huge stir. And that was a human error. And so to not have confidence in public water supplies, there's over 50,000 community water supplies in the country that supply water every day to, I want to say around 70% of our population. And so some people use those few examples and choose to not do it. So like the assessment tool I talked about earlier, one of the questions we ask people is how close are you to a public water supply? Because there are certainly people not willing to take care of their wells. They don't test. They don't care to learn how they're, what kind of aquifer they're in, or if their well is an old dug well versus a properly constructed drilled well. And so, it's those folks really shouldn't be private well owners. They're not doing what's best for them or their family. They just don't know better, or they don't choose to know better. And so, unless you're going to do all the things that you should do, it like an operator does, sample, manage your equipment, all that stuff. Be sure that it works in all conditions. So in the middle of the winter, I could tell more stories, but the bottom line is the best example I can give you is a family just south of Champaign bought a house, and we know there's arsenic in the aquifer there. And so they were colleagues on campus here, and so I suggested that they need to get a water sample done. And sure enough, their arsenic was at 78 ppb, which the standard is 10. So they were debating whether to buy the house or not, or what they'd have to do. So I was like, well, you can put in an RO unit and take care of it that way, as long as it's the right type of arsenic. There's two forms, there's +3 and +5, and you might have to oxidize it to the +5 first in order to have the RO work more effectively, some of those sorts of things. And I said, do you know how close you are to a public water supply? And I said, the other option would be to run public water to your home. They're actually in an area where the subdivision was just built across the road, and it turned out that they ran public water to that subdivision. And so they contacted our water company, and I think it cost them $5,000, which isn't nothing, to run a line under the road to their house so that they're on public water now. But they're a young couple, they're going to have family. When you have an RO unit and you have arsenic in your water, you just have to always be sure your RO unit's working properly. You're going to sample a lot more often, especially if you have little kids. And in the end, it's more of a hassle. There's a lot of things to consider, and they felt like it was worth it, since they were purchasing the house at the time, to just roll that all in and do it at once. And I think it's the best thing they could have done. And I realize not everybody could afford to do that. They could. And so they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to maintain it. It's all done for them. And if you have the opportunity to get on public water, and I'm sure there's a few cases where it may not be the case, but the vast, vast majority, it's the best thing you can do for you and your family. And unless some people enjoy managing their wells and all that stuff, and they have the wherewithal, more power to you, Radon. So radon was also something that's in the last webinar, but I decided to put this slide in because several people asked about it this month. And it's really an inhalation issue, right? But I found this on an EPA website that, and what I recommend you do is Google basic information about radon in drinking water. That exact search is the title of the page. It's an archive page on EPA's webpage. They don't maintain it anymore because all the information isn't going to change. But what they found is 168 cancer deaths per year from drinking water. And 90% or 89% of those were from breathing radon that was released whenever you turn on your faucet and the radon escapes into the air, and 11% from stomach cancer from drinking water containing radon. So it certainly could have an effect. When you look at the number of cases, it's obviously really small, so it's pretty rare that it would cause a big problem. It's more of a risk from, that's why you have radon remediation when you buy a home, and it's in your basement and all those things. And there is treatment. You can aerate beforehand, so when the water comes in your home, you could, instead of just having one pressure tank, you could have an aeration tank first, which has a vent that goes outside. Basically, it's free sitting water so that the radon can escape, and then you pump it into your pressure tank and go from there. It's what you do when you have any other kind of gas problem like methane, or you can use a GAC. But again, there's issues with that because that cartridge is considered hazardous, and so if you try to do that for your whole house, which you'd need to in this case, because the issue is anytime you turn on any water outlet, shower, spigot, sink, whatever, if there's radon in the water, it's going to shape into the air there. So you're at risk at every tap, not just what you drink. So how can someone determine how deep the depth of grout is on an existing well without a drilling record? Well, so grout is the clay or cementy material that you pump around the outside of the well casing in the borehole that you drilled to drill the well, so which is called the annulus. So when you drill a well, you're going to put in a 6-inch casing. You might drill an 8-inch hole, 7 7/8 with a drill bit. So what do you do with the extra gap between the actual ground and the outside of the casing? You fill that with grout. And it's meant to be something that's impermeable or very low permeability, like a clay or cement or concrete, so that water can't run down the outside of your well down to where your screen is or to where the casing's seated or get into the aquifer and contaminate it. So if it's not, really, there's no way to know. If it's not on the drilling record, then you'd have no idea what kind of grout they used or how much of it they put in or to what level. Most grout is put in as a slurry, which means it's mostly liquid. And so the thing that everyone should be aware of is, even if you know where the grout, how much grout was put in into what level, there's no way to be sure that it's really there and stayed in place. Nebraska's Department of Health and Human Services, their state agency, did a study in the early 2000s where they used a clear plexiglass casing and they cameraed putting in grout around the outside of the casing in a number of different geologies. And what they found is that in some cases the grout went out into the formation and did not stay around the well, and so there's gaps there. And there's no way to see that day in and day out with a normal well that's made out of PVC or metal. And the odd thing, honestly, was when this came out, one of the drilling magazines expected all the states to change their rules, and the only state that changed their rules was Nebraska. They suggest you use bentonite natural pellets, not the formed ones, but the ones that are just naturally cut. They're the best at getting down there and staying put, and when they get wet, they expand. And I know I talked to someone, I think from New Mexico, I want to say, who said they were looking at changing their state rules to require that as well. But so grout is a funny thing, because when you see a well record and you assume that it's properly grouted, Nebraska's work suggests that you really can't be sure, and which is unsettling to everyone, especially anyone who works with it regularly. What foods are good to put down my garbage disposal for my well? So I really think the person who wrote this must have meant their septic system, but I just saw this as an opportunity. If you really think about this whole situation, if you have a garbage disposal and it's going to a septic, which is the only way it could be helpful to your well, you don't want water from your septic getting to your well. So it should have no effect, whatever you put down there, because if the septic field is contributing to your well water, then you're also going to have nitrate and bacterial contamination, because it's mixing with everything else you put in your septic, right? So I'm assuming you're really talking about your septic system, and regardless of what you think might be helpful, a septic system works naturally using the bacteria from our bodies to break down everything that gets into the tank. You shouldn't eat additives, you shouldn't, anything else. But one thing that's really a bad practice is using a garbage disposal. It adds solids that can't be broken down by bacteria in a timely manner, so they become part of the solid gunk that's at the bottom that you have to pump out. And most septic associations and experts and state agencies recommend that if you have a garbage disposal on your system and you have a septic tank, you need to pump it twice as often as you would for a similar size system without a garbage disposal. And so if it's recommended you have an 800-gallon tank and then you have 4 people and it recommends you pump it every 4 years, you probably need to pump it every 2 years. And if you're really into you use your garbage disposal all the time, for you put your eggshells down there as well as potato clippings or skin and carrot clippings and everything else, it might even be more often. And so yeah, the message is really you shouldn't use a garbage disposal with a septic system at all, if you can avoid it. Weather effects on well water. So can rain or other weather effects or weather events affect components, meaning different constituents in the water of well water? Are there other ways weather might be important to wells? Well, obviously, weather's important to wells if they flood and it gets overtopped, like when hurricanes in 2017 hit Florida and Texas. We had thousands of wells in both states that were flooded and it ended up being full of bacteria because they weren't properly sealed at the top. And so surface water got in to those wells and they became contaminated. If you take, the 2012 era drought in California, you see the effects of long-term drought affecting water levels. Many wells went dry out there because of the pumpage, and we saw 300 or 400-foot wells being replaced with 700-foot wells, and in some cases, those wells weren't deep enough as the drought went on. But really, when you're talking about immediate effects on an individual, it really depends on your well construction and geology. So I know I showed most of the stuff at the bottom before. I changed a little bit, but it's really about what type of well you have. A shallow well, like the well I grew up on, if we had a really dry summer, our well would be dry, and we may go days or weeks without water. One time, it was a farm, and we had a few horses, and I left a hose in the horse tank and forgot about it. And the next day, we didn't have any water, and went out and figured out it was because it had been running all night, and we didn't have water for 3 days. And so, it depends on your well, and it depends on the geology. If you have a sand point, for instance, they're shallow with no grout. If a heavy rainstorm is going to push a lot through the shallow sand that's at the surface, a lot's going to infiltrate. As an example, we have mostly clay soils in Champaign County where I live, and we estimate our aquifer here only gets about a ½ inch of recharge because of that. Where on the other end of the aquifer along the Illinois River, where it's all sand, we estimate they get about 13 to 14 inches of recharge into their aquifer every year because of rainfall. And that's because so much more infiltrates because it's just more permeable soil at the surface. So those things matter. It also matters if there's a source nearby. If you have a lot of rain, it's going to push things from a feedlot or a septic system, and could raise the head, if you will, on the water table or an aquifer and push water towards your well. And there's also vulnerable geology, which we mentioned before, karst or highly permeable soils. With karst geology, it's all rock and there's sinkholes and caves. Water can move through just like it's moving in a stream. And so there's no slowing it down. It's not infiltrating through soil where it can be filtered. It's just going straight in. And so, I know the head of our groundwater section did one of the first studies looking at groundwater with microplastics. It was first discovered in a karst aquifer, and it's just because it's a direct conduit from the surface, and so that stuff can get in as well. And then the other issue again is not properly sealed. So if it doesn't have a sanitary cap and it's flooded, I mentioned what happened with those hurricanes. You have grout issues, and then you also have, like the well I grew up on, is hand dug, brick lined. And if the water table is, if the near surface soil is saturated, water is going to move through and get into the well a lot easier than it would be if it's a deeper well that's got a solid casing, where like in a standing gravel aquifer, water's only coming in where the screen is at the bottom, and so it can't come in at shallower points like it can in an old hand dug well. Hopefully that answers your question. And then that was the last question I'm going to answer. We're going to get to the other questions that folks have, but I wanted to mention that we did get a few really site-specific questions. A couple of them were really long. You'll know who you are. That are really for more of a one-on-one conversation, or they really require more site-specific information that I'm going to be able to actually give you any kind of advice on. It's going to probably require more local expertise. But if you email us at this email, this will go to Katie. She'll get it to me, and I can follow up with you. We can at least look into it Um, you know, one was more straightforward than the other. And, you know, getting involved in some of the politics of what might be going on with your state agency or some of those things aren't things that we can really get involved in. But if it's a technical question or it's about groundwater or wells and anything that I know, I'd be glad to share. So with that, thank you for attending. I am going to see if we have any questions. It looks like we do. So I'm going to drop that and pull this over, make it full screen. And so, is there a standard level for sodium and turbidity? I don't believe that either of those are considered a contaminant with a standard for health anyway. But you know, your doctor may have you on a low sodium diet for some specific issue you have. And if there's a secondary standard for either of those, which there probably is, I don't know what it is offhand. If you just Google secondary standard for sodium, secondary drinking water standard for sodium, and then do the same for turbidity, it'll come up to the EPA webpage about their secondary standards, and you can see there's a table there that lists all those. I don't know what they are, if there is one. I bet there is for turbidity, just because it becomes a treatment issue for a community water supply if the water is too turbid. Can you talk about the process of chlorinating a well? So quickly, when you chlorinate, and I'm assuming you're talking about shock chlorinating a well, you have to understand how much water is in your well so that you can mix water up to put through the top of your well, and you mix it with the water in the well, and then you turn on an outside spigot and run the hose back in the well so that you're circulating all that and mixing all the water up. That way you ensure that all the water is at the same concentration, if you will. Then you shut that off and you go into your house and you turn on every faucet and let it run until you smell chlorine, then you shut it off. And you do that for every shower, every toilet, every water outlet, including your outside spigots. The best time to do that is overnight. So you do that at the end of the day when you don't need any more water. And you leave that chlorinated water in your line overnight. That way, if the bacteria could be in your pipes in your home. I had a driller tell me that they had a situation where they could not get rid of the bacteria, and it turned out there was a dead end line in their house, and the bacteria were in that line. So there's not water flowing through it, and it was able to take stagnant water and bacteria able to build up. But it took them, you know, months to figure that out. And so there's always those kind of odd things that can happen. But in a normal procedure, you've put chlorinated water in touch with any of the bacteria or biofilm that are in your pipes, as well as in your well casing and your drop pipe that's bringing the water up from your pump. And it sits overnight. Then the next day, you're assuming that the contact time has been enough to kill the bacteria. And then you go back to every spigot, shower, toilet, and you turn them on until you don't smell chlorine anymore. And you've basically purged all that out of the system. And at that point, you'd want to collect another water sample and take it in for testing. And for the water you're drinking and cooking with, you'd want to boil it to make sure, because if it didn't kill all the bacteria, then you don't want to be drinking water with bacteria in it. And once you get your sample result back and it's clean, then you know it worked. And if not, then you get into all those other issues. You can chlorinate it a second time. You can consider adding continuous disinfection. Yeah, that's kind of the process. Okay, have you ever been concerned a person is over-filtering their water, i.e. to the point she could be at risk of disrupting the water solute balance in it? You know, I'm not a doctor, and so I do know that for with RO units, sometimes they also sell, like, for better lack of a term, a mineralizer, where you're putting minerals back in the water, and that's a lot most of the time for taste. But I don't know that there's any harm. You have to ask your doctor. And if you're drinking DI water, you know, deionized water, basically that's what you're doing. You filter it so much that, you know, there's no minerals in it. There's no advantage. You know, there are things you need, even arsenic. You need a little bit in your body, right? And a lot of other metals and constituents in water. So Yeah, I'm sure for some people it could cause an issue, but it's again, I'm not a doctor, so it's not something I've looked into or have a good feel for. Um, so where would low-income families find resources? Well, anyone can call us for help as far as um, with well issues. As far as if they have a problem and they need to have it fixed, if they meet certain low income criteria, the USDA through the Farm Bill has funding to provide monies, either low interest loans or grants to add treatment or fix a septic or fix a well. And we actually, Katie put on here, there's a funding page. There's also a webinar we did where we had USDA come speak um, about options. And yeah, the truth is there's just not a lot out there. Private people on private wells are assumed, it's explicitly mentioned in the Safe Drinking Water Act that it doesn't apply to private wells. Private well owners are on their own. And depending on where you're at, like in Illinois, passing the New Jersey law would be, I'd be really surprised if it could ever be done. We're a farming state. Our landowners have a lot of political pull. Our Farm Bureau has a lot of political pull, and it's not something that they would want is to be required to test their well. And so Illinois will probably never have that same law that New Jersey does or Rhode Island does. And so it really depends on, not to get off topic, but yeah, there's a webinar. That's what I would recommend you do is watch that, and we've provided a lot of what is out there and how to seek funding. The Water Systems Council has a program, and I'm blanking on the name, but they provide free wells to people if they have a big enough need, and they've got a long list of people with need. But yeah, there's a few opportunities out there. And there's two programs at USDA. One of them is just for wells, and it's usually a loan, a low interest loan, like at 1%. And then there's another program that's more for a low income homeowner that'll do more than just like their well or septic, but also, roof their house or windows or whatever. But there's a pretty strict low income limit there. I mean, it's well below the poverty line, I think. So, but yeah, or email us and I can get you those resources as well. I'd watch the webinar first on our funding. I think we did that last February, but you can find it on our webinars page. What is the best UV filter system? My water keeps testing for coliform. That's a question I can't answer. I don't deal with treatment vendors and actual different types of systems. I know UV as a technology has become much more accepted, and we see a lot more, especially people with springs, because they're all contaminated. There's become quite a market for UV in the private water industry. And so, yeah, just do your homework, make sure you're doing things the right way. There's probably folks you can ask, even find online if you're having issues. And, make sure it's not something silly that is the reason it's testing for coliform. And you might have a well contractor even take a look and collect samples at different locations in the line and see if it could be something past your UV system. I mean, I don't know without more information, but I would be sure it's not your UV system first. And if it isn't, then you got other issues it could be. So how do I find out information on my aquifer? My well was drilled in 2011, 20 gallons per minute, 240 feet deep, cased 55, pump, well was 60. What else do I need to find out about my well? Thank you. Okay, so the fact that it's cased to 55 feet means that it's a bedrock well. And the fact that it's your well log, one, at least in Illinois, not every well log has this on it, but there's a place for it if the driller filled it in. Usually when they drill a well, they'll pump it to get an idea of how much drawdown there is. So, if they know that you're a homeowner without livestock, and they may put in a 5 gallon per minute sized pump. That's, I think maybe not even 1.5 horsepower is a lot more, 20 gallons per minute. So I was going to say a 0.5 horsepower pump. So they will pump that at a higher rate. So they'll put in a bigger pump, like a 20 gallon per minute pump, see what the drawdown is, pump it for an hour. So like on our well logs, there's a place where you can say the static water level is 60 feet. The pumping water level was 100 feet after pumping 45 gallons a minute for 1 hour. And so that gives you an idea of how, quote, good your well is, or if it's still, what kind of drawdown you expect and all that stuff. That's one thing you could know. Also the geology, I don't know how shallow, I guess that it's 55 feet. That's really the important thing. If it's a bedrock well, that means it's solid casing all the way to the surface. That's really, most of it. And the only other thing would be to know the water quality and that stuff. And I guess really your question is about the aquifer. I would talk to your state geological survey, and also there should be a resource agency in your state that deals mostly with water quality. So the way I would Google that would be to say groundwater quality maps for Illinois and see what you get. It may be your DNR or DEQ or whatever, but if you once you find out the agency, then you can just call them and say, I'm trying to find out information about my aquifer and the water quality there. And 9 times out of 10, I won't say every time, but most of the time those folks are really eager to give you more information and be helpful. And I know we deal with that every day. People call us, and we house the state's well logs, so we can look through all the other well logs if someone's buying some property to say, well, this is the kind of well you can expect to drill, or this is the kind of water quality you can expect to find. And so, if you're in Illinois, you should call me or one of my staff, and we can give you that information. But I can't think of anything else offhand. You've got a lot of it there. That's good. Having the actual log is really good too. Just sometimes, especially if it's not too old, you talk to a well driller about an issue and they'll remember your well. They'll remember, oh yeah, I remember when I drilled that well. And so they can be pretty helpful. Can you supply me with a list of a few labs in Illinois to get my water tested? And what is the average cost per sample? If you will email us, I can give you that information. Or you can go to the Illinois EPA's website and look up certified labs, or just say Illinois IEPA or Illinois EPA certified labs, and there'll be a list. Now, they list all the labs that are certified to do public water supply testing for Illinois communities. That can be labs that are not in Illinois. So, there's a lab in Indiana or Ohio or wherever that works with some communities in Illinois. They'll be listed because they've gotten approval and went through the process to become a certified lab in Illinois. And some larger labs that have labs all over the country, they have staff who make sure that they're certified in every state. But there's a number of Illinois labs, upstate and mid-state, and two that I can think of, but I'd rather give you a list. And one of my jobs in Illinois is not to show preferential treatment to any given private entity. And so I'd rather just give you, if you email us, I can send you the link to that website. So our lab also does testing. So it's about the same, I think, as what everybody else charges. But I'll send you a list if you email us. What shows up on a water sample if microplastics are present? Well, they don't show up. You'd have to test specifically for microplastics. One of the issues we have is there's a list of constituents that we recommend, but things that are contaminants of emerging concern, which like pharmaceuticals, personal care products, PFAS related products, you have to test for those separately, and it's pretty expensive. Most of the time, and even with pesticides, that's not on a normal water sample result. If you sampled for all of those things, you'd be looking at least 4 figures for your sample costs. What usually, like I get asked all the time about, well, my house backs up to a farm field. Should I be concerned about pesticides? Well, I need more information. I need your well log. I need to know how deep you're getting your water from. I need to know the geology from the surface down to where the point where your water is getting in your well. All those things matter. If it's, solid casing to 300 feet and the first 250 feet are clay, then I would say you have no worries whatsoever of getting pesticides into your well. They're never going to get down there. But if you have an old 14-foot hand dug well and you're applying pesticides very close by, then I would test for pesticides. So, same thing with microplastics or anything else. Some of those things you really need to look at the geology and the well construction and decide what kind of risk you think you have, or ask someone to give you their opinion of what kind of risk you might have. Because it's not something, I personally know it's become a big issue because we find them in everything in the air. Microplastics are becoming the next hot research item, if you will, too. But what does it actually mean health-wise? I honestly don't even know. I know it's not something we want in our bodies, but I don't know what kind of risk if it's even identified, how those might be a problem. I think it's more of it's the way I look at it anyway, is it's more of a description of how we are as a society, that we have microplastics everywhere. Then, so, but I can find out more if you email me. There's 2 folks here that have studied microplastics, and they can give you a lot more qualified answer about what those risks are and, how they found them and what kind of testing needs to be done. So, all right. It's 3 o'clock. And so if I didn't mention it before, these webinars, if you're getting CEUs for it or CEs for it, are worth 2 hours instead of 1.5, because as we answer more questions, we find that we've been on till 3 most of the time. And so for this year, we've just asked NEHA to approve these for 2 hours. And so hopefully that's works out for everybody that's interested. So, and again, if you have any other questions or you have a question later, 1, you can email us at info@privatewellclass.org, and 2, in about 2 hours, you're going to get an email saying thank you for attending, and it will have my email on it. You're more than welcome to email me. So, all right, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Katie, and have a great day and rest of your week.